Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 12 of the No-Frills Teacher Podcast. I'm Joe Camps, and joining me tonight is a very special guest, Dr. Kenneth Savage from the School District of Lee County. Dr. Savage, thank you for joining me this evening.
Joe, it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
I'm very excited about this, and I got to say this right off the bat. When I had mentioned to colleagues and friends, and I actually did put out a little teaser on social media a few weeks ago saying that, hey, I'm going to have Dr. Savage on my podcast. The amount of text messages I was receiving and DMs and Facebook, oh my goodness, you have Savage on. I can't believe you got Savage on your podcast. I'm so excited to hear what he has to say. It was so overwhelming. And I'm super excited about that. And I know a lot of people, myself included, are very happy to have you on and have an amazing discussion with you tonight.
Oh, it's such an honor, Joe. I'm sure they must have thought you meant the other Dr. Savage, my wife, because she's Dr. Savage too. So I'm Ken. I'm Ken. So please, by all means, but she's the real Dr.
She,
Savage in our house.
well, she is a lovelier savage. I will say that. I don't know if that's like an oxymoron saying like a lovely savage, but she is. And I absolutely love Becca. And we're going to touch on all the savages tonight. Don't worry about that. There's a whole handful of savages out there in the county. So so like I had said, once again, building student success in Lee County is actually the name of this episode. Want get a lot to talk about. Amazing work you to do in your career. Lee County is so fortunate to have you as our deputy superintendent. I personally have been very grateful getting to learn under you as my administrator in the past. So we'll kind of touch on that. But before we get too far ahead, let's take a step back for 1 second. So yes, you are the deputy superintendent for the school district of Lee County in Southwest Florida. But tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Ken Savage, Dr. Savage, the person, the educator? Enlighten us on a little bit of your background leading you up to your current position as deputy superintendent. And then we'll fill in the gaps of your journey over these past few years.
Sounds great. Well, Joe, first off, again, thank you so much for having me today. It's a real pleasure to get to talk to you. And it's likewise, you have a lot of great memories in my life, career wise. You got to see me a bunch of different times professionally, and I've just been very excited to see your evolution, your career as well. So really, the good feelings go both ways, man.
Thank you.
So for me, really, I think it starts with my Ohio roots. I'm originally a Midwesterner, so I came from Ohio in the Cleveland area, and I think that's still a part of my identity. I'm still a huge sports fan for all my Cleveland sports, and my whole family is from that area. And so we moved to Southwest Florida in the 80s and, was a student down here in Lee County and went all through elementary, middle, and high school down here. So Lee County is actually my home. But I still follow all my Cleveland sports teams, and we still have some family that lives up in Ohio. But I really consider Lee County kind of like the Midwest of the South. So when people come down 75, there's a lot of Midwesterners down here. So for anybody who doesn't know that,
Yeah.
I still very much consider myself a Midwesterner. And there's a lot of other Midwestern folks that come down here and call Lee County their home. So I represent that group as well. But because I've been down in Florida so long, I really am now really mostly a Floridian. And so the cool thing about it is I have, even though I'm, lived most of my life in Lee County, I've also worked kind of all over the state. So after I graduated high school from here, I went to undergrad at Florida State, actually went into film school, and it was super fun. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so film school was a really fun opportunity there. I ended up switching from film into education because I really loved coaching sports. And I thought, maybe what I could do is teach during the day, coach at night, and then during the summers, write screenplays and maybe end up being a Hollywood movie maker, right? And so that was kind of like my thought of why education. And I got into it and really ended up, teaching for a few years. I was an athletic director. I coached a lot of sports. I coached football, basketball, both boys and girls, and really kind of got into that. But what was super cool for me was I ended up going to law school in Jacksonville while I was teaching. And I really kind of fell in love with the idea of trying to fight poverty through education. And that's really kind of what put me on the education track was I worked in a failing school in Jacksonville, working with kids who were, in a very, very high poverty environment there. It was a failing school. It never was higher than a failing school. And my experience in that school is really what kind of changed my whole life. At that point, I really realized, like, I don't know what kind of job I want to do for the rest of my life, but I know I want to try to fight this idea of poverty, kind of stripping people of dignity, stripping them of the right to have dreams. And I thought, what a better place to do it than through education. So I went into administration at that point, switched. I went to University of Florida for my master's degree. And in education, when you get your master's, you really try to go into administration. The best way to kind of do that is to get into school-based administration. And so I figured I'd move home to Lee County at that point. And I kind of fast forward, I skipped around. I lived in different places. I worked as a teacher in Gainesville. I worked as a teacher in Tallahassee and coach. And I also worked in Jacksonville, Duval. So I really got to see a lot of other places in Florida. And then, but I started my administrative career down in Lee County and became an assistant principal, a bunch of different levels, started at Cypress Middle School there, moved over to Dunbar High. There was part of their turnaround work when they went from a D to an A. And we were one of the highest performing in the state. We went from a D to an A and had back-to-back years of an A school, which was really cool to be a high poverty high school, but an A school twice in a row. It's really cool. We had a kind of a record there. And then I went over and became a principal at Veterans Park, which is a K-8 school. And that's where you and I got a chance to work together, where I got to see, for those who don't know about Joe, Joe is, and he was, one of the most amazing kindergarten teachers I ever saw. I mean, just, we used to call you the kindergarten whisperer. I mean, you've done a lot of stuff. You're a literacy coach, but to watch you work a group of kindergartners, which, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know in education, teaching kindergarten, one of the hardest jobs you will ever do. I mean, it is absolutely so hard.
Preach. Absolutely.
You are so good. And I remember watching you do it and just being like stunned. And I thought, oh my God, this guy, I could never do any of this. Like, I couldn't cover you for even 30 minutes and even come close to what you did every day. So mad respect for when I got to watch you do that amazing
Thank
stuff.
you.
But that was just the beginning. I mean, that's just one of our you and I work together on a lot of other stuff too, but that was one of the cool things that will make sure your listeners know about you. So I got the K-8 experience, and that's really when I kind of fell in love with the earlier learning side of it, of like how important it is to solve the problem before high school, before middle school. And that's kind of what put me on the opportunity then to do a turnaround, where I got to go to James Stevens, which was for 7 consecutive years, the lowest or second lowest performing school in Lee County. And I got to be a part of an incredible team of teachers and educators and admin that really just, they went in and worked with the group that was there. And we went from one of the lowest performing schools in the whole state of Florida to the second highest gains in math in a single year. And I'm just very proud of the fact that multiple folks later, some of our original people are still working there. There have been multiple administrators since me, and they're just incredibly successful to still, do great things at that school. And so it was never really about me or even about any one person. It was about the work. And that's kind of been a defining moment for me career-wise, is that experience, just how great it was. Because after that turnaround year, I was selected as a state of Florida principal of the year. And they gave me, they asked if I would come work in Tallahassee to kind of bring some of my passion for the type of work we were doing up there. And really, I ended up learning a ton from Tallahassee, working up there at the state agency level. And that was really cool, just to learn about really how the state government works related to education. I really didn't know anything about how it worked with the legislature and with the executive branch. It's a big deal, a very, very challenging, unique opportunity. And then after that, I came back to Lee County and I had an executive officer role and became the chief operations officer, which was its own special journey for me, not really something I ever thought I would do. And then after that, I ended up becoming superintendent here in Lee County twice. A super cool experience of that, as well as the chief strategy officer for Dr. Bernier when he was here. And now I have the privilege of serving as the deputy superintendent for Dr. Carlin, the first elected superintendent of Lee County in 50 years. And I love getting to work on the work, tackling some really tough systemic issues, slow to get the work done, but really important. And we really want to try to build a better system for all of our kids and all of our staff and the whole community. So yeah, man, that in a quick nutshell was really my whole career in a glance.
It's like the old Chris Berman, ESPN, the fastest 3 minutes over there. Give me your 20 years, 3 minutes. You did it, and that's a lot to unpack. And you've done so much, and I love it. And especially, the administrative team that we have now at the school district of Lee County, led by Dr. Carlin, who is amazing, and you, of course, and our regional superintendents. Listening and kind of unpacking what you had shared with your journey, and there are many things that I knew about your journey, and obviously some things that I was not familiar with. One thing that I actually remember was when I want to say it was the first time that you were in the board meeting. I believe you were being really kind of interviewed. I don't know if I'm using the correct terminology or wording to be the superintendent at the time, interim superintendent. And I do remember you bringing up the story about being in film school.
Yeah.
And you had shared about that. And I could relate to that actually because my bachelor's degree is in communications, media studies, and I used to work in television before I was a teacher. So I worked in post production and the same thing. And I would, do screenwriting when I was in college and all those things. And similar, when I would kind of work and do freelance jobs. And eventually I was like, I think I need something a little bit more consistent. I went to education. So I had educators in my family. And the same thing I had like to say, I was like, I'll write that screenplay kind of in between or during the summer. In fact, I think I still have my screenplay sitting somewhere in my closet that I started 20 years ago. Actually, it was probably about 2004. I think when I got hired by Don Bryant over at Tropic Isles. Yeah. So it's sitting in there somewhere. And every now and then I get the itch, I break it out. And, my wife will tease me, Alexis, and be like, she was like, shouldn't you be finished with that by now, 20 years later?
No kidding. Oh, so I can totally relate to that. That's the thing when you in college, you think it's going to be one thing and then you get there and it's something very different. You never, teachers, they never really have a real summer. Either you're working or, you're doing your prepping or, or taking the limited vacation you can really get, or some combination. There's really just not that time. And when I did my doctorate, it was a similar situation where I basically, especially as an administrator, I never had any time, and so I very easily could have not had my doctorate. You'd be talking to Mr. Ken Savage, not Dr. Savage, because if it hadn't been for going to the state level when I left to go to Tallahassee, I never would have finished that doctorate because you just don't have time, and I think that's one of the things I push in education is we have got to create a sustainable environment. There is no success. There's no effectiveness without it being sustainable excellence. And that is, we have a long way to go, in our field. It's just that we're not nearly close enough to where we have to be to create a sustainable professional environment for anyone. And that's part of the passion now is like to try to build that system. And I wish I could tell you that we are like, oh, we're almost there, but we're not, and we have a long way to go, but it's like a marathon, you really just dig into the meaningful work and you start to lose a little bit of the grandiosity that you're not going to fix it yourself. You've got to be a part of a team and you have to keep, it's kind of like it's like a relay race where you run your leg of the journey as hard as you possibly can and leave it all out there on the field. And then you're going to hand the baton to meaningful people like you. I think for me, that's the beauty of kind of this stage of my career. I never really thought I'd be kind of getting on the back half of it. Yeah. And now I am. And it's like, holy cow, how quickly did this go? And there's so much to get done. And you just don't feel like you even made a dent yet of the type of work we need to do. So
I can really, and obviously, it's different, obviously, like larger scale on your end, compared to say where I am. But I think this is year 21 for me. All 21 have been in Lee County as a career changer. And I look back and I reflect like I accomplished these goals. However, there's so many more that lie ahead that I really want to achieve and support my students, support my colleagues, support my district. And I don't think people realize actually how large the school district of Lee County really is. Can you give us a little bit of insight into student population? Where do we fall in the state? Because this is a very large district to operate.
That's right. Yeah, we're the 27th largest in the whole country. In the state rankings, it kind of fluctuates based on your enrollment. We're always in that 8 to 9 range. I think right now we're number 8. And the challenge, of course, is that the enrollment is a moving target too. Even throughout the year, it moves. This year is kind of a weird year too, in that across our state, we've noticed some drops in enrollment. So I haven't seen the other surveys for the other, survey 2 is one of our big enrollment capture periods of October. So I don't know kind of where the other Big 10 are, because that's kind of how we generally rank ourselves, is within the Big 10, the largest 10 districts in Florida. But anytime you're top 10 and top 30 in the country, you're absolutely one of the biggest systems. And it is a very unique situation. We're very diverse. We cover a tremendous land area, over 100,000 students when you consider charter schools and you consider everything. In our traditional schools, which for us, typically you're in the 86,500 range. So you're just talking a significant, massive system. Collier County to our south, their land area wise, they're pretty big too, but they're half our size. So it's just, we're massive in Lee County. And even though as big as we are, we still have some small town type of feels to it. We're not like a Miami or a Tampa or, Orlando, these mega cities, but we're very large in our own right. And so it's a massive operation. And on top of it, we're very diverse. I think that's one of the things that a lot of folks don't know is, from a socioeconomic standpoint, we're actually one of the 2 neediest districts in the Big 10. Polk and Lee County are the 2 highest in terms of the free reduced lunch population. So when you think about the challenges educationally, those things actually make it even more challenging. You're dealing with lower kindergarten readiness. You're dealing with a lot of students coming to school who, aren't necessarily ready for school, and the teachers then and the systems have to fill those gaps. So it's a very, very challenging assignment. But you know what, Joe? We like a challenge. Yeah, that's what we do.
Absolutely.
Firefighters run to the fire. They don't run away from it. And I think for us, we want to take on the harder, more challenging situations. So when we're successful, we can say there are no excuses,
So then if somebody's listening to this episode and they're, no matter what size district they're in, or they're inspired, they're in a larger size district, they say to themselves, well, what is Lee County doing to turn around academic achievement, for an entire district? What are some of the plans, or what has been put in place or implemented, or can you even share some thoughts for what the future may hold for a district of this size, really, for that academic achievement to share with other people?
Sure. Yeah, there's a few things, right? And some of these things we borrowed from other districts. Like one thing we did fairly recently is we regionalized our approach. Part of the reason for that is we were kind of still acting like one small town system where, you could fit everybody into one room. We can barely fit all of our school-based admin and central office admin in a single room. It's very, very difficult to do that now because we're just so large. We've grown so quickly over the years. And so a lot of what we had done worked when we were smaller, but as we kind of outgrow it, you lose some of that customer service. Kind of like when you have a school that's, over 3,000 students. It's very hard to make those students still feel like they're part of a smaller system when it becomes so massive. And so same thing as a system. We tried to find ways to incrementalize, to make it a little bit more smaller and manageable, and also to kind of honor the differences of different communities in our district instead of treating all of our schools as if they're identical, right? Because they're just not. Cape Coral is very different from Bonita. It's very different from Estero. It's very different from downtown Fort Myers. It's very different from Lehigh Acres. So when you kind of have this one size fits all, this kind of Walmart approach to education where you're not really acknowledging that these communities, you're one massive community. So the regions kind of gave us an opportunity to try to do that a little bit. It's not just to make it a little bit smaller, but it's also to make the support systems a little bit more regionalized so that people don't just call kind of a faceless central office and they get lost in the abyss. We wanted people to start to know the same people. We wanted them to have a regional associate superintendent. So you have a person. It's kind of like when you have a principal. Your principal, especially if you're a big school, you can't be everywhere, right? So you're trying to build that leadership culture where it's more distributed. But I think like as a superintendent, when I was superintendent, if I visited just one classroom a day, right? Like you think, okay, just go visit one classroom a day. It would have taken me over 10 years and I still wouldn't have visited every classroom. That's how many classrooms there were. I mean, that just gives you some sense of scale of how big it is, right? And that's just one a day, right? If I just talk to 5 kids a day, 5 students, I would never in my entire life get the chance to actually talk to every single one of them. Like that's when you think about the time it takes to cover the scale of our system. it's just wild when you think about it that way. And so breaking it into bite-sized pieces and more kind of like what corporations do a lot of times, they break it into regional models. They have franchises, general managers. They do things like that to try to make it more manageable when you're a massive system. So that was one thing we did that we borrowed from a lot of other big mega districts is they regionalize to try to break it down that way. It also helps you to differentiate your resources a little bit because, like, for example, if you go to Lehigh, looking off of last year's data, we had one of the highest percentages of ESOL students in the entire state of Florida, right? So you have over 1 out of every 4 students was a second language learner, an ELL student. So it's like that is among the highest in the whole state of Florida. And yet if you go to, Cape Coral, for example, it's not at all close to that same percentage,
No.
right? And so that's why it's so important that you don't just kind of say when you're thinking Lee County, it's just one thing. And that's just one example. The other things we've tried to do is really try to put some more quality things in place, to support our teachers. One of our biggest challenges we had a massive teacher shortage. When Dr. Carlin was sworn in November, there were over 220 teacher vacancies at that time. And that's a little bit problematic for us, right? Because you can talk
It's
about
huge,
developing
huge.
teachers,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean, there's nobody there. If you're a kid and their family, and you don't have a classroom teacher, and you're a 5th grader out in Lehigh, and you don't have a classroom teacher assigned, then that means it's a combination of substitutes, of people covering that classroom. Like that is a non-starter for Dr. Carl when she came in and it was mid-year. Like, what are you going to do mid-year? I mean, it's November. Where are you going to find 220 teachers, right? But she,
Yeah.
to her credit, she kind of threw down the gauntlet and she said, you know what, folks, you got to solve it. And I, to be honest, I thought she was crazy. I mean, when she said, I thought, oh my God, does she have any idea? Like, what are we going to do? Like, this is crazy. We're not going to solve this problem mid-year. But you know what? That's why she's our superintendent. She went after it. She had our team go after it and force people to just say, okay, what can we do? What can we do? We started contacting people that had, didn't have degrees, that had college degrees, rather like bachelor's degrees, but maybe were subbing or were paraprofessionals and thought maybe we can help them get certified. Maybe they'd like to do this, And before long, and there's a lot of stuff happening at school-based levels of people look at their master schedules. Well, by the time they got to April, which was her internal deadline, we had knocked that thing down to like less than 20. I want to say it was like 16 or 17. She
Which
goes
is
from 220
incredible.
to,
Yeah.
it's incredible. And that's not even in a full year. That's just in, less than 6 months. So I think that really was, to me, a very important experience to see that she was not going to, put up with excuses of it's hard. It's whatever we can possibly do, leave no stone unturned and get the whole team deeply engaged in this kind of results orientation. And honestly, as a data person, it was music to my ears that she pushed for it, but I was kind of blown away. And then she took another step. The HR team said, okay, let's look at our current, budget, our current schedules. How many vacancies do we have going in the summer? And it was 575, which is insane. I mean, almost
Yeah.
600 teaching vacancies going into the summer. But we took on some really heavy hitting stuff. And by the first day of school, the goal was to have all of that eliminated. Well, we didn't get it. We didn't hit 0, which she wanted, but I want to say it was like less than 40. It was like, and that was all able to be covered by people who are certified, coaches, people who are in the classrooms, so that at least you don't have to have a substitute covering that. You've got someone who's certified, and that's while we continue to work away at it. We're not just going to stop now. We're digging at it. And we actually just had them brief us this week on it. That number was even down from that. So, the problem, of course, is you do lose people throughout the year. As you know, it's a very hard job. And, and life happens to people too. So you lose people. So every time you're gaining people, you're also losing folks. But we're right around that number still. And while we still want to get to 0, I think it just shows you the power of kind of focusing on outcomes and saying, hey, this is our goal, whether we make it or not, that's going to be it's going to really focus our energies. And very proud of all the people who've worked to try to get that thing down. Because quite frankly, we could work on all the best systems. We got great curriculum. We could do, great assessments. We could have great training. But if you don't have even people there to receive it and kids are walking into an empty classroom, we lose. Our kids lose. That's our data will be terrible in those classrooms, as we know. And so it's not over. We've still got a lot of work to go, but that was another big heavy hitter strategy that really to try to go after that. So that's another thing that we are doing. So that's a couple things just right out of the gate. But I could give you more things if you'd like to talk about more.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that was, I don't think people realize, like, to the scale, like how massive an initiative that was on Dr. Carlin's part, her team, her cabinet, you, HR, to reduce that number, because that's all I've known. The bulk of, majority of my career is just that we have a shortage, and it's not just a local, dilemma. This is a national issue. I feel that beyond Florida, beyond Lee County, and this profession in general, we're in a crisis, right? We say teacher crisis, right? We're short. Teachers can't attract teachers, from College of Education. They're not, enrolling into programs, College of Ed. What do you look? You have to look elsewhere. Look at your career changes. Look at alternative certification routes, and all those things, substitutes. To reduce that number is truly remarkable, and it's really a testament, like I said, to the superintendent, to you, HR, the whole team, the regional superintendents, to find quality teachers to put inside the classroom. Because I have experienced as a coach in the past what it is like when you have a revolving door or no teacher in a classroom throughout the year. There is no consistency at all, and unfortunately, who pays the price? The students, and they're not performing. And that's something that you guys obviously, are something that we're up to the task, and continue to be, that hopefully can inspire other districts as well, that, hey, if Lee County can do this, and look at the size of Lee County, maybe we need to take a page out of their playbook. So I really, my hats off to you and to the superintendent and the whole team downtown.
Yeah, it's funny when you tackle these issues. You're not. It's kind of like you're trying to treat a problem that is much deeper than just what it appears, right? Like, why do we have a national shortage in so many areas? Like, some don't have it, but many do. And what does that tell us about education? What does it tell us about the kind of the conditions that are being created, right? Like, that's part of our job as a system and as system level leaders, is kind of acknowledge that, right? Like, don't run from it. Don't try to say, oh, it's just great. It's all easy. It's a good, just because it's a great job. Just come do it. You have to acknowledge the fact that you could recruit a brand new teacher, a career changer, but if they aren't successful, they're not going to stick around, right? Or if you can't get enough money to pay the bills, like, people aren't going to stick around. They're going to find something that will, right? Like, all these challenges are very real. But at the end of the day, like, our kids, they're depending on us, right? Like, every single kid that is required to come to school in our country, like, we want to give them the very best we possibly can. And I just believe that teaching is such a noble thing, that anyone who works education really wants to do this work. Like, it's just a beautiful thing that they're willing to kind of choose this career. And so then our job as the leadership group is to try to do whatever we can to change the underlying situation, right? Like, and I think that's a challenge, right? So education is hard. I think that's something that most parents got to taste during, like, the pandemic, for example. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh my God, just watching their own kid or their own kids, if they had multiple kids. Imagine if you had 30, or 20 or 40 in your classroom, and trying to get them all, and they're all in different places. It's a hard job, and it's a real professional job. And I think sometimes that's been lost. And people kind of thought, oh, education, I could get up there and talk to kids for, 45 minutes, an hour, no problem. No, it's a ton to be what I would say is, and I love that you're No-Frills, the No-Frills teacher. Being a great teacher isn't necessarily about doing something fancy, right? But it is, you'll tend to find that your best teachers, they prepare, they put in the work, they do. And that is not easy. Planning even 45 minutes of instruction is incredibly hard. And planning, like elementary teachers, a whole day of instruction. Oh my God. I mean, it's just out of this world. It is such a planning intensive job. And then when you actually execute it, it's such a draining job, because you have to be on all day. Imagine doing a show. We're going to do the show. It'll be an hour. Imagine doing that all day long, right? Like, you'd be exhausted, right? That's what you experience, Joe. That's why my heart goes out to people who do this field, because we're trying to create a situation that, to a lot of people, if they really actually try it, they're going to see how hard it is. And so how do we then create a situation that is not just, acknowledging how hard it is, but making it better, making it easier, making it more sustainable, making it a higher quality, taking things off the plate wherever we can, and addressing those things so that really high caliber people say, you know what? I love being a teacher. I never want to not be a teacher. I want to work my whole career doing that. You know what I mean? That's kind of the
It's that
challenge.
sustainability, like you said. You have that passion, that drive, and then we need that sustainability in our district, our schools, just that consistency. And you're right, it is draining. Once again, educators get it, not educators unless you're maybe married to an educator. You are, like you said, perfectly said, constantly on. You're continuously making decisions throughout the day. The decisions you plan for, unexpected decisions you have to make during the day. And then that's why at the end of the evening, my wife and I look at each other because she's an educator, and we can't make a simple decision like what's for dinner
Yeah.
because we're so drained all day teaching and making decisions and being on all day. Like, oh, okay, obviously we got the little kids at home and all that, so that is that's another part of the energy and all that we put into it. But I liked in a way kind of what you were saying about taking care of your people, and it segues nicely into masters, right? So you received your master's degree in ed leadership, and you got your PhD, and I'm currently halfway through getting my ed leadership,
Awesome.
degree. So I'm working through, and a lot of things that have come up often throughout my program is servant leadership
Mm-hmm.
and learning about servant leadership, which I honestly was not really familiar with. What servant leadership was is before I started for my ed leadership. Anyway, when I think of you, I think of I think of servant leadership. Now that I understand, I think of the Joe Restinos, Dr. Restino over at Success Academy. And him and I had a conversation on a previous podcast a while back about servant leadership. What does servant leadership mean to you at this stage in your career? And you had said how you had, when you worked at Duval, Gainesville, all over in your journeys of really your heart in all that you do. So how would you define servant leadership in the eyes of Dr. Ken Savage?
Yeah, it's a great question. And to be honest, I think anyone who, honestly in education, a lot of what we use, we're serving others, right? Anybody who works in kind of public service, you're serving people, right? I mean, that's really what you're doing. You're serving the community. When you work in education, you're serving children, right? But when you're in administration, you really are serving the people who serve children, because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are directly interacting with the students and kind of creating that. So you have to recognize that it's your job. Your job does not exist but for their job. Back in the days when education was kind of founded in our country, there were lead teachers. There weren't principals. There weren't administrators. There was a lead teacher, and that kind of evolved in that and into that piece. And it eventually turned into, as schools got bigger, they studied a bunch of things. I'm sure you've learned that through some of your work as well. And I think for me, it became very evident. Part of the thing is, why do you do this work in the first place? It's about that passion of, I got into this because I was trying to make it better, always trying to make it better. And I have a quote that lives in my wallet. It says, find people who want the work, not the title. Sadly, a lot of times in administration, people who are ambitious, people who just want to, they want the more money, they want the title, but they don't really understand that it isn't about that. You're only there to serve other people. And there's a big distinction though between just doing what people want and serving others, right? Like,
Yeah.
serving others doesn't always mean that you're going to make people happy but you're trying to solve problems that are very complex and very layered in a way that people won't always understand. Let me give an example. So, I mentioned earlier about some of the things we tried to do to address the teacher shortage and whatnot. But the reality is, when we studied the data about our teacher shortage, what we found were there were certain schools where the shortages were even worse, right? Where they were absolutely terrible, terrible teacher shortages. Like, mid-year, 10 mid-year vacancies. Like when I got to James Stevens, for example, the year before I was there, they had 10 vacancies in a faculty of only 50. That's 20% of their faculty was vacant mid-year. But meanwhile, you had schools that are in the other parts of our community that had 0 vacancies, right? And so even though we think of it's a national vacancy, it didn't mean it was equally distributed across all schools. You had some schools that were in a much worse situation than others. So the problem, unfortunately, is your solution to this is you got to you got to disproportionately address the schools that really have a much more dire need before you address some of these other ones. And in some cases, you may be creating some division among teacher ranks where it's like, wait a second, help all of us. But the fact is, yeah, we do have to help all of you, but we also have to focus on things that are going to impact some of these vacancies more than others, right? Like we have to address those really significant vacancy rate schools more than we have to address some of these other ones. Not to mention, there are even subject areas that we find tons of vacancies and other subject areas we don't have nearly as many vacancies. Why is that, right? So you can't treat teaching as if it's this homogenous thing, right? Because it isn't.
Yeah.
Teaching different levels, different challenges. These are really hard things, right? So when you're having to come up with solutions to try to address some of them, you're going to make some people happy, but you're going to make other people really angry. And that's a hard part about administration is you have to be willing to stand for the principles behind what it is you're doing and be clear about those things of why we're doing these things, as opposed to, and so I'll give you an example. We put an incentive program in, which, our position was that legally we had some flexibility over, as we address these things. And we really wanted to address it kind of through our normal bargaining process anyways, because we just had such an interest in, helping to kind of shine a light on some of these differences within, kind of the teaching ranks that are really divisive and challenging. But we kind of want to address those things head on. And so we put it as part of our kind of bargaining is to talk about those things. But ultimately, it's as a divisive topic, unsurprising, when it ended up, kind of going sideways. And our union partners, we have great respect for trying to work with people on these really complex things. They really did not want to address that, and that's okay. They didn't have to, right? But we utilized this incentive to basically say, you know what, we got to try to take care of these schools that are in a really bad position right now. We have to, because the summertime, it's only going to get worse. We know every year that's what happens. They end up being kind of an exodus in those schools. People leave to get closer to home, which who can blame them? If I live in the Cape, why would I not get closer to the Cape? But the problem was we needed to do something to try to stabilize those learning environments. And so we did. We implemented. Now, is it very popular? No. But an incentive isn't designed as a popularity move. An incentive isn't designed to please people. An incentive is designed to incentivize behavior that, but for that incentive, may not occur, right? That's the whole point of an incentive, right? You do that on purpose. You don't reward students for doing things that they would have done anyways. That's the whole point of an incentive. And
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
we put in this very difficult thing, but what we found was it made a huge difference in the retention and stability of those schools. I mean, we have the best drop off in those numbers that we've ever had. And so while we don't love creating division, we don't love even having to have that conversation. The fact is we have to put the kids and their situation, fifth grader at one of those really, high poverty schools that's low achieving, we have to put those students, we can't not address it. And so that was something we did that is not popular with a lot of folks. It was very difficult, but the impact it made for our kids is something that we have an obligation to do. And that's part of servant leadership, right? Servant leadership means you have to go at these really hard situations and knowing that it's not going to make you very well liked. You have to do it anyways. And I think that that's important too. So, the quote that I have on my wall says, find people who want the work, not the title. If you're looking for popularity, if you're looking for money, if you're looking for ego, if you're looking to fill that bucket about yourself, if you're looking to prove things to other people, you really have no business being in administration. That's not why we do it. If you're there to make people's lives fundamentally better, if you're there to create dignity in the workforce, dignity in your students, dignity for families, that's the kind of people that we want, because that's really what it is. It's all about service. And to me, that's the heart of servant leadership.
Perfectly stated. And it really is. I want to, I guess, emulate, and follow in the footsteps, honestly, of you and other, Dr. Carlin and doctors, and many other great administrators. Chuck Velarde. I could name drop probably 100 people, but everyone had something in common. Like you said, it was the willingness to serve others, to be a leader, to be someone counted on, dependable, looking out in the best interest of your students and of your faculty as well. So I'm really glad you had said that. And I do want to touch on the incentive program real quick. So I am one of those teachers that I had left my previous school to go work at a tier 4 school. So that's one of our, high need, poverty area schools to go be a literacy coach. And you said it's not popular by many, some, but however, I do feel, and I can say this personally because I'm living it now, the the staff that is in place at my current school, I'll name drop Manzi Elementary, phenomenal educators that have remained on staff, and that school had a history of constant turnover because I was 10 years ago, and your wife as a coach there as well as a teacher leader. So on. So I saw continuously every summer, it's like brand new faculty, brand new faculty, brand new faculty. And now it feels that, and then people came over from other schools through kind of these incentive programs, whatever it was, is because there's this need saying, hey, we really need to support and fill in the gaps in many of these schools that have these gaps and really to bring those students where they could be and bring the schools up and improve. So I know personally speaking that it's an opportunity that I feel is beneficial. Now, I do have to ask you this question though.
Yeah, please.
If you don't mind. This is with on incentive pay because this has come up oftentimes within various, teacher groups and things like that. And teachers say, okay, so I'm just going to play devil's advocate. You incentivize teachers from, let's say, an A school or B school, and they go and they work in, a C school, D school, whatever.
Yep.
Well, what happens with those schools where the teachers are now leaving to go work at these tier 3 and tier 4 schools? Is there this hope of sustainability in a tier 1 school? Let's say our A schools or our B schools, or is this their concern, or has there been a discussion downtown at the district office, at central office, that now you're going to have your kind of Robin Peter, you're Robin Peter to pay Paul.
Robin Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah. Like, are you now getting,
said.
Are you having gaps now? Yeah. In A and B schools because of this?
Yeah, so it's a great point, right? So, and a very, I even just love the whole way you kind of laid it out, right? Because that is the challenge, right? When you still have 40 vacancies across the district presently, that means there's still 40 classrooms that need somebody there, right? Until you're at zero, until you're at a surplus, until you've got a more competitive hiring environment, you're still losing, right? You're still losing for something. What we attempted to do with this was to shift the balance a little bit so that you didn't just have the same group of kids losing the most, right? So when we think about the school grades, right? So I'm going to tell you, school grade, it's often not an actual representation of the value being generated by the school. The school grade is most statistically correlated to the students being served. And so what you'll find is that schools that onboard significantly high proportions of high performing students. So for example, schools that have the highest incoming kindergarten readiness rates, right? There are kids that go into kindergarten already reading chapter books. And there's other kids who do not know their letters at all, have never sat in a line, have never been in an organized environment, don't know their numbers. They are coming in knowing absolutely nothing, educationally speaking. Meanwhile, you have other kids who they've already mastered all the content of kindergarten, and here they are showing up as kindergartners, right? Like that's happening in aggregate across our entire district. And what you'll find is in most of the A schools that are perennial A schools, they also tend to be serving very high level students walking in the door, right? Now it doesn't make it easy. Teaching is hard no matter what, right? And if you have, it's a hard job no matter what. However, which kids are their lives depending on you, right? Like if I'm a group of kindergartners that have no kindergarten readiness and I'm at the bottom of the barrel in terms of that piece, and I have a substitute for 1 year or even 2 years, right? If I'm a school that's got 10 of those vacancies, like the school James Stevens the year before we got there, unfortunately, the data is horrific on those students ever climbing out of it. They end up becoming mostly high probability dropouts, at-risk graduates, and they end up functionally illiterate even as graduates. So the challenge you have for our community is we have a absolute super duper urgent need to make sure that those kids who are coming into these really at-risk environments, that they absolutely under no circumstances do not have a teacher. And so when you're thinking about shifting, you've got to have that covered, because here's the reality. Like if my kids don't have a teacher, it's not what I want. I want my kids to have a teacher, but guess who's going to be able to help my kids if I don't have a teacher? Me. Guess who's going to be able to get them a tutor if they need it? Me. guess who's going to help them at home? Me, right? That's a different ballgame. And so while I never want to have a kid without a high quality teacher, and we will not stop until every classroom is filled with a high quality teacher, what we're hoping to do is be responsive, as our data has shown us that certain schools have a much harder time holding on and stability, just like what you've lived at Manatee and many others.
Yeah.
Those are the schools that are constantly churning over, having to onboard brand new teachers and career changers and train them up, because teachers, like normal people, want to live closer to home. And Cape Coral happens to be a third of the teachers live in Cape Coral. So a lot of teachers, if they teach out in Lehigh and they live in Cape Coral, who can blame them for wanting to live closer to home? If they live in South Fort Myers, like, who wouldn't want to live real close, because then you're spending less time in the car and it's better for your planning, and you're part of that community. Maybe your own kids can attend your school, right? Like, who can blame them? But that's why we had to go at it that way. And what we found is there's been no negative impact in terms of school grades. So when you're onboarding all those high achieving students, those tend to never be D and F schools ever. Now, unfortunately, you can see schools drop from B to a C or an A to a B. That does happen sometimes. But what we found data, and this isn't just a Lee County phenomenon, it's really across the state. When we look at all the DNF schools in the history of Florida for the last 25 years, since they invented school grades in 99, we have found almost no examples at all of any suburban or affluent D or F schools statewide. In fact, I got to meet one of the lowest achieving schools that had one of the lowest value adds, because I'm big on value add, that's another thing people don't realize is we are both people who studied the value add stuff in great depth. One of the lowest value add schools when I was an executive in Tallahassee was a school in the Panhandle. I won't name them because I don't want to embarrass them, but they were essentially like a beach school, like a Sanibel school type of, for us, an equivalent. They resided on the beach. They were highly selected. They had lots of students, very high kindergarten readiness coming in there at K-8, and they had one of the lowest value adds in the entire state of Florida, and they were a C. They basically were adding zero value to their students. Their kids were dropping levels, and yet they still could not earn a D or F, in spite of the fact that of all the schools in Florida, they were the lowest value add. So you think about what that means. That tells you the school grade does not capture the real value that's being driven by educators. You can find C schools out there that are some of the best schools in our state. So it's really not just A's and B's, and I hope that kind of answers a little bit of the other side of that too.
It does, and you're right, and I'm very glad that you had clarified that, because I think we do often, and I was obviously unaware of that. I had no idea, and I found that fascinating that you were sharing that about the schools because of the value add, and I think that that's something important that needs to be said and shared with educators, because, like I said, the perception is, well, like I said, if you're pulling quality teachers from here, what is happening at those schools? To know that, and which kind of leads me into the next two questions. And you had mentioned about understanding and looking at the data, looking at value added models. And so if you're listening to this episode, Dr. Savage, he's a data guru, right? I think that's safe to say. How did this come to be? Like, you kind of taken on this moniker of like the data guy, the data guru, really. I feel like, and I was blown away. Really, I think it's the first time I actually had attended a committee meeting with you. I want to say it's teacher evaluation committee, a task force, what you used to call it. And I was on the state committee for the student growth implementation committee for the VAM value added model that we had added in Florida at the time, from Race to the Top, kind of dating myself. And here comes this guy at the meeting. It was like one of the first meetings I had met you, and you're breaking down like everything. And I'm blown away. And I honestly was, because I'm like, hey, I'm on the state committee. Like, I know stuff pretty well now. Kind of voted and selected the different, the model and so on. And you're just like, you're going doing your thing. And then every committee meeting afterwards, you're just kind of in your zone. How did you fall into this kind of almost like, I would say, passion or love of data analysis?
Yeah, it's funny. People who really know me in professionally, like, definitely, they know that I'm a huge data person, and it's really become like a family passion. Both my brothers were really big data guys as well, and I think it's just because we grew up really strong in math and everything like that. I was really we're math brain kind of guys, and we're all good at it. And when I got into education, I really was not into data at all initially. But you know what kind of lit the fire for me was I had a boss who I'm not going to name, but I respected immensely, a really good boss. But I saw her do, she was considered a really strong data person. And I saw her kind of interpreting data incorrectly. And she was trying to tell a teacher what kind of impact they were having on their kids, and she was wrong. Like, I was sitting there listening to her explain it, and I'm like, that's not accurate. You don't realize what you're telling them is actually not accurate, right? So it's funny because in education, it's kind of, we use a lot of soft metrics. A lot of folks who get into education is because they love to help people. They're not necessarily like data empiricists. They're not data scientists. They're not the kind of, some people are, but it's probably not many, right? It's a lot of people who just, like elementary people, they love kids. They love to make a difference in kids' lives, or people in the secondary, they tend to be people who love their subject discipline. They love, art, or they love, teaching language arts and whatnot. Like, they just love
Yeah,
their
it's their thing. It's their thing. Yeah.
right? But for me, one of the things that I kind of, once I saw the data being done improperly, it was kind of like, because you're giving this teacher this wrong idea. Like, you think so and so's doing a good job, but actually they're not. They're riding the coattails of their kids. Their kids are acing every test you put in front of them, but they're actually one of the lowest value add in the whole district. When you compare their advanced classes to all the other advanced class teachers, they've actually got terrible data comparatively, but you think they're good because you're comparing them to an intensive reading class. Like, in the intensive reading class, all these kids in it, they can barely read. And you think that this one's doing a better job just because they have a higher overall average test score? Like, it was seeing it in that level that was so obvious to me, and that other people didn't just see. I was blown away by that. And then I became kind of fascinated by this idea that, can you actually see the impact that people have, because there's so many students, like a system of 100,000 students. And for us, I got to look at data statewide. So one of the things that I really fell in love with when I was a state executive was I got to look at data for the entire state of Florida. So you really got to see the different impact that systems could have. And like, one district that really stood out to me as being extraordinarily high value add was Miami-Dade. Miami-Dade was able to take a district that back, plus it was now 15 plus years ago, they were below state average in almost everything, right? Like, they were a very average to below average system. They really did not have good data. They were under the state in almost everything, but they had a superintendent who was very, very tough. I mean, he went in and he got just incredible people around him, and they just moved that needle, and they built the systems that eventually yielded one of the highest performing systems in the entire country, not just Florida, but the entire country. And one of their chief academic officer, Cam Patton, came to Collier County. And sure enough, Collier County, people don't know this, but back in 2010, our school district, we used to actually be an A district, Lee County, and Collier County was a B district. They actually were under the state average. They were below us. We were number 2 in the Big Ten. And after they hired Cam, she was not Miss Popularity when she got hired there. But basically, after 1 year of her leadership, they became an A district. We became a B district. And then we had a constant turnover of superintendents, lots
Yeah.
of revolving door. And they became one of the top performing in the state of Florida, right? So to think it can't be done, to think it's, Collier County as we know it today, obviously people think of how high performing they are. They weren't always that way. We actually were higher performing than back then. And I was here in the county when that happened. So that's what people always realize is these systems, these data systems and all this, it really, you can get a lot out of it, but you also have to know the limitations, right? Like, not everything needs to be measured, and not everything you need to value add. Like, are you really going to try to tell me that there's a better art teacher based on some test or whatnot? Like, I don't buy it. And I think sometimes people try to, these policy decisions where they want everybody to get a VAM score with that. It's not really, what's the point, right? That's why I don't necessarily love it when it becomes evaluation. What I would say is I want people to know how the impact they're having, because wouldn't you want to know, like, if you were a doctor that was making the wrong call on certain things and your patients weren't being well helped by it, wouldn't you want to know it? Like, if there's things as a teacher and you're new and your career change, you're trying to learn your craft and you think you're doing a great job, but you're actually not doing as good of a job as you think you are, wouldn't you want to know that? Like, wouldn't you, at the deep down, like if you're an administrator and you aren't really having the type of impact you want to have, I think everybody wants to be successful. And I think you can utilize data if you do it properly and you have the right guardrails. You can use it as one piece of information to help you gain insight and learn and grow. And it becomes a great bedrock for professional learning and so forth. So that's kind of the context of which I love the data analysis. But it's been a journey over my entire career, Joe, where I started from not being a data person at all to becoming over years. Like I learned Excel and I learned all these cool things. And now I would say it's, I passed that baton to, my brother Phil, who
Yeah.
is now our head of our business intelligence area. He was a great teacher, really, really good teacher, not Mr. Popularity, but really got incredible results out of his kids. And he is now really kind of taking it and running with it in ways that well beyond what I can even ever did.
He's remarkable. In fact, I'm actually going to see Phil tomorrow.
Awesome.
So yeah, he's coming down to do some PLCs with us and share some really cool things that are happening in business
Awesome.
intelligence. So, and as a fellow Golden Apple recipient, your brother, Phil as well, and so which kind of now segues perfectly into the Savage family tree within the county. Kind of we start to wrap up this episode. So I worked for you as you were my administrator at Veterans Park, and then your lovely wife Becca was my AP, one of my APs at Menifee Elementary. I worked with your sister-in-law Becky as well at Tanglewood. No Phil through the Golden Apple process. Your brother Frank, I recall, I think the three of you and your two brothers played basketball when I used to run the Employee Wellness Basketball League.
Yes.
So it's like basically collecting the Infinity Stones, like all the Savages that I've got to work with and get to know over the years. So what is that like to really have this professional, relationship, obviously, family relationship with your siblings, your wife, your sister-in-law? How does that feel? It's got to be a pretty cool, amazing experience to have.
It's funny. I was the oldest of my three brothers, right? So I was the oldest one. And I can at least say I was the first teacher in the family. Like I was the first one, right? So I can say I was there, and I'm not trying to say they're copying or whatever it was, right? But but here's what I can also tell you, Joe. I, I'm the worst teacher in the family. So like I'm the one who went to school for it. I studied it for the years. It was my major, and I went in and taught and I did it, right? Like my wife is a better teacher than me. My sister-in-law is a better teacher than me. She's elementary, of course. Both my brothers are better teachers than me. And my other brother's wife, she tried to be a dance teacher, but she did not she could not get hired. She was really, she still teaches dance, just not in a school, but she does teach dance extra. Like we're all educators, right? All six of us between my brothers, our spouses, we're all educators. And I think for me, what I found is I'm better at the system level work. Like my gift was in seeing the complexity of those things and trying to figure out how to go at that. That was more of my passion, going at the system level work. But I have always respected the fact that the rest of my family, they were all really good teachers. Like they have respect for this job for what it is, right? Like they loved the relationships of getting to know kids and being that life altering impact for kids, right? And so I think it is a great shared passion we have. I'm really big on kind of that transformative poverty side. I don't know that everybody's always feels the same way I do in my family about that, but I would say like my wife and I, for example, that's one of our shared beliefs. We met at a conference in Orlando for AVID. For anyone who's not familiar with AVID, that's that advancement of the individual determination. That idea that, you get to decide for yourself that you can achieve whatever you want to achieve. And we want to put whatever support systems we can to help kids, no matter what family situation they come from, no matter what their economic situation is, we want them to find success, right? And my wife and I, we met at a conference in Orlando. And I think for us, while we're very different people, she's way better than I am in pretty much every way. I'm
She's the
probably
most organized teacher I ever met. I'll tell you that. She's the most organized. She's the most organized.
For sure.
Color coding, a calendar, planning. She is the person.
Yeah, she really is. And I think that's like the point is like, right, like we link up on our passion. And I think that's even my brothers, like we are so passionate about trying to create the best system. And I'm glad that I've kind of rubbed off on them that they want to tackle the system as well, that they're willing to take on. Because I'll tell you, people, when you go to administration, it's not, yeah, it's a kind of a thankless job, because if you're really successful, then you have to acknowledge that it's the teachers who are doing it, right? Like they're it. So you're not getting any credit there. So if you need credit, you're not in the right job if you go into administration. At the same time, the reward is in the work, right? Like that's again why I put that quote: "Find people who want the work, not the title." That was Dr. Larry Tian, who was another superintendent we had, interim superintendent here, and one of our true curricularists in our district.
Great
It was
guys.
his quote that I used to borrow all the time, because I found that it was like my true north. Like if you really focus on the work and that's what you're about, then you're going to be satisfied. And I think all of my family, in spite of they're all different, they're all good at different things. Becky was a great elementary person. Becca, obviously language arts. Both my brothers are math teachers. Tamara was dance. Like they're all great people, but we all kind of come together in this idea that we are servants in this community. And I think we're proud of the fact that that's kind of where our careers have laid out, is that we're about lifting up other people, and and lifting up kids, lifting up workers. That's really what we're about. And I'm very proud that we all kind of do it in different ways, our own special gifts of whatever we bring. But I'm very proud that everyone has chosen this very noble field to kind of lay our careers in this space.
And without a doubt, I am certain that the Savage family will certainly leave a legacy, or is currently in the middle of building a legacy in this county. And I said, once again, from personal experience of working with many of you, your wife, family members, all those things. So it's just been, it's been awesome. One Savage is more, amazing than the next, I'd have to say.
Thanks.
So you have, like I said, have that saying in your office. Now,
Yeah.
I do have to ask one final question. This was a request from a mutual friend, a school board member, Sam Fisher, and he had said there is I believe, a plaque or a nickname, a nameplate that you do have with. Can you tell me a little bit about this? Because he had piqued my curiosity with this, but he wouldn't tell me what it says.
Yeah. I mean, it's on this theme of what we talked about, data. So he bought it for me as a gift, and it sits right behind me, and it says Dr. Strategic, Master of All Data. So he thinks of me as a data guy as well, and it sits right behind me in my office, and it's right there. And it's really funny because one of our workers here, who did not really know my name, knew Savage, but was kind of like wasn't sure how to spell it or whatever, did not have English as a second language, as their first primary language, thinks my name is Dr. Strategic. And so that's what it will be said as Dr. Strategic. So it's kind of a funny thing, is that now they think the Savage and the Strategic are the same. So it's kind of an interesting little story that now, at least among one person, that is what they think my name is Dr. Strategic, but they pronounce it Dr. Strategic. So it's actually kind of a funny little story. So I'm not surprised, Mr. Fisher. He loves to mess with me, and
Yeah.
I will find a way to get him back for that.
Yeah, he goes, Ken should get a kick out of that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, well, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to talk to you this episode and really hear your journey. And once again, like I could just feel the passion, just listening of what you have for the students and for the teachers in this Lee County School District of Lee County, and just this remarkable journey that you have had. Thank you, like I said, as a teacher. Thank you as a district leader for your guidance and your support. Personally, it's greatly appreciated. It has really helped me grow as an educator, as a professional. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I know, like I said, when I first started this episode, I said many people had reached out to me with excitement, knowing that you're going to be on the podcast. And if you don't know Dr. Savage personally, I think this episode will kind of now share a little light on why people think so highly of you. If you know personally, like I do, you understood why. So once again, thank you so much for all that you do, supporting us in Lee County.
Thank you, Joe. And just again, I want to shine that light right back at you. Just really appreciative of you. I love the fact that you have the podcast and you do this, because it allows you to kind of shine a light on any of the topics that you know are going to be something that folks would want to explore in this No Frills Teacher Podcast. And I'm really honored to have been a guest, and just so, again, just very respectful of you. And I mean, they didn't have time to go into all the ways in which we've had a chance to get to know each other over the years, but just so appreciative of you and your journey as well. And just so grateful that you've had the opportunity to have a stage on platforms to be able to talk about a lot of your passions and just to shine a light on the things that you know are so worthy of kind of our field. And just again, pleasure to know you, a privilege that we had the chance to know each other. And I'm always here, happy to do the work.
Oh, absolutely. We could have probably like a 5-part mini series, all things we could talk about. We could go on for hours, probably you and I, about these things. So, but I'll cut it off now. I am Joe Camps. This is Dr. Kenneth Savage, Deputy Superintendent of the School District of Lee County, Building Student Success in Lee County, Season 3, Episode 12 of the No-Frills Teacher Podcast. You all have a wonderful night. Goodbye.